Hi everybody, welcome back. In this project video we're going to make what I'm calling a simple briefcase. We've done the buckhorn bag. I think last year we did that, maybe the year before, and that bag is really involved. It takes a lot of leather, a lot of time and tooling time and construction time. It's just a little more involved. It's not impossible. It's not the most difficult bag in the world to build, but it is a lot more involved both in time and investment. This bag here, I wanted to design one that was a good entry-level bag if you've never made any type of briefcase or tote or anything like that. This is very simple. The gusset system in this bag is very simple. There's nothing hard about it. I didn't even roll the top edge of the gusset material. That's going to keep this bag construction very easy. The inside of the bag, I didn't line it. You certainly could. You could line it. You could put pockets in there. You could make the gusset wider. There's a lot of things you can do with this bag. But what makes this bag unique is the handles that we did on here. I did not invent these handles. I've seen these done before, but these type of slide handles are pretty popular, and the thing I like about this bag is there's zero hardware involved. You have no zippers, no D-rings, no snaps, no buckles, nothing. It's all leather, and so it makes the bag very versatile, and you can kind of change this bag up as much as you'd like to. But the way this system works, as you'll see in the video, is we're putting what I'm calling heel blocks here on the bottom of the handles, and then they've got these straps, and as you pull the handle up, those blocks keep that handle from sliding out from the straps. And so it's a very simple idea. Like I said, I've seen it done many times before. I've seen that type of application on other types of bags. But the nice thing about this is it gives you a lot of room for artwork. So there's a lot of tooling options that you could go here as far as putting somebody's brand. This one I made for my daughter for her little 4-H stuff. So when she goes to meetings, she can carry all her things. And so we put our brand in there. We are offering a pattern pack for this video, or for this project video. And in that pattern pack, there's 6 different tooling patterns in there to choose from. So you got a little bit of a variety. You could obviously do geometrics or anything like that. But let's go ahead and get started and build this bag. All right, so we're going to cut out the simple briefcase. This is a piece of 9/10 ounce Herman Oak skirting leather. You could definitely get by with like a 12 ounce. If you wanted to do it a little heavier, you could use that. If you wanted to line this bag, I'd probably stay like a 7 ounce on this, and then maybe a 3/4 liner, something like that, whatever you want to do. But it doesn't need to be super heavy, super thick. This is meant to be a simple briefcase, so we're not going to line it or anything. We're just going to cut our panels out. We're going to need to cut out, if you got the pattern pack, there's a pattern for the handle. We're going to cut 2 of these out. We're going to cut out these little pieces here. These are the straps that will go over the handle and hold it in place. So we're going to cut out 4 of these. And then we are also going to cut out 2 of these, which will be a front and a back panel. So I'm going to cut these out first, so I can be sure and get some good pieces, and then we will end up cutting out all the other pieces right after that. And when you're marking this off, cutting this out, I go ahead and mark where my gusset stop is going to be. That's where I need that gusset to stop on each side. So start there, go around, and stop on this end. Do not mark any of this off the pattern. We're going to go ahead and just place those on when we get ready. So you don't need to mark any of that. That's just to remind us that that's where the handle is going to go, so when we're laying out floral tooling. All right, so we've got our veg tan parts cut. The only part that I didn't cut was the little heel stops. We'll cut those in a little while later in the video when we get closer to that. But I'm gonna go ahead and cut my gusset while we're out here in the cut room. And I have, this is some leather that we got from Maker's Leather Supply. That was on one of those chap leather sales they were running, or odd lot deals. Well, not odd lot, but just he's got a lot of footage of different bag leathers and things. And this stuff, I don't know if you can see in the video, but it has a beautiful pebble grain to it. This stuff is so nice. And Claudia allowed me to grab this one and cut our gusset out of that for this bag. So she's gonna make a duffel bag or something, I'm sure, out of this. But I'm gonna grab us a gusset for our little simple briefcase real quick. Now, one thing you need to remember with bag leathers, especially this kind of, I call them odd lots. They're just kind of, these guys will buy pallets of, 1,000 square feet or whatever of oil tans and different types of earth tone bag leathers, or what I call chap leathers, because these what we used to rummage through to build our leggings out of, chinks and chaps and shotguns. But the cool thing about them is that you get some one-off colors. They may only have 10 sides of that one color because it's really just an odd run. They just kind of put everything together. But you get some really neat stuff. So kind of when you find it, buy it, because if you don't buy it then, you may not see it again. Whoever tans all this may not make that particular one again. So when you do see something like that, go ahead and grab it. The one thing to remember too is these are usually cheaper. You can get these for, anywhere from sometimes as low as 70 bucks all the way up to $120, which for a whole side of really nice bag leather, that's pretty reasonable. And so you can get some good deals on this. But in doing that, sometimes you get a side like this where this back is cut out right here. It's hard to, kind of eats up your yield if you're trying to get a long straight gusset. Now I've got to drop further down in the hide to get that for, say, a bigger type bag where you need a longer gusset, maybe a rope bag, something like that. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's not a bad thing. It just means that this spot right here in the hide, for some reason, the tanner's trimmed it out. So they're not going to be all perfectly shaped. So just keep that in mind when you buy stuff like bag leathers and things like that. Sometimes, if you're not buying premium price, premium grade, you may get a side like that. You also may get some brands in there. And this one actually has a little brand on this side. It's really faint. You probably can't see it in the video, but there is a little brand in there. I'm not going to worry too much about it because you can barely see it, and it's for us. And for this video. So we're not going to sell this bag. We're going to make this bag for Claudia and for Olivia for their 4-H outings when they go to meetings. And so it's just a handy little bag. Throw what you need for that meeting in there. And so we're going to go ahead and use it as it is. But on this gusset, what you're going to want to cut in the pattern pack, if you get that, I have a suggested gusset size, which is going to be 3 to 4 inches by 34 to 36 inches, I think I have on there. Just cut it long, because we are going to fit that gusset like we do on many of our other projects anytime it comes to gussets. And this one's going to be super easy, so it won't be very hard to fit, but you need enough length. So somewhere around 36 inches is what I'm going to cut mine, and then I'm going to go ahead and do 3.5 inches. The very first bag I did at 3 inches, so I'm going to try this one just a little bit wider, just see how that works out. But I wouldn't go much wider than 4 because this bag is supposed to be kind of slimlined. But if you want to go 5 or 6 inches, that's up to you. You can go whatever width you want on this gusset. So I'm going to go and get our straight edge out. And it looks like I can kind of save Claudia a little bit of trouble by going ahead and staying on this side of that U-cut right there. And that's going to help kind of fix that. Actually, I might come down this way. This way may be better. And that way she's got the butt end to cut a bag out of. Always kind of keep in mind of trying to maintain that yield. And that way you don't kill it for the next project. So I'm going to try to keep that right in there. That'll get me down. That's about 36 inches. That's going to be how much gusset length I'm going to need, and we'll trim off yay much when we go to fit it. So I'm going to go ahead and go right there. Trim that piece off. I'll throw that in my scrap bin over there. Now, like I said, I'm going to do about 3.5 on this one. Let's see what that looks like. It's not that critical on your width. Just do whatever you want to see in a bag. Line up our marks. Make sure we're cutting a nice straight cut. This stuff marks really well with a pencil as far as just using it like a scratch off. Sometimes you might need to use a silver pen on some of these leathers. And that's just going to ensure that you get a good mark that you can see. All right, there's our gusset. So we will save that, and now we will grab our veg tan pieces, prep them for tooling, and go ahead and get some tooling done right quick. All right, so I went in there and went ahead and got my blue painter's tape. We'll just prep them out here. We've got some stuff going on in the shop. Now we can get a little quietness here to shoot the video. But anyway, I'm gonna prep these. I am not gonna prep my handles because I am not going to tool the handles. If you wanna tool them, remember you're gonna have a stitch line on this side and this side, so it's a really narrow window there. But if you wanted to tool them, you can certainly prep them with painter's tape to keep them from stretching out. This is 9-10 ounce leather. Don't think it's gonna be a real big issue. The heavier you go, the less you gotta worry about it. But if you wanna tool them, you sure can. I'm not tooling mine, so we're just gonna leave those alone. We will line these though with a 3/4 ounce chap leather or veg tan leather just to beef them up, because I want these handles, you know, fairly firm. I don't want them real floppy. And then of course these, we're not gonna do anything to those little straps. But on here, I'm gonna go ahead and prep these up, and I'm just gonna run blue painter's tape around the corners basically. On the front one, I might run a couple strips down the middle because I am going to tool up our brand in the middle. And then I'm gonna do corner set here. If you're tooling the whole thing, I would probably prep it up all the way. If you're gonna line it, you could use poster board. You could use whatever you want. If you're using 13, 15, or 12 ounce leather for the body, you probably don't even need to worry about it. Because like I said, this isn't that intricate of a bag, and so if it stretches out a little bit, it's not going to really affect a lot. But I am going to floral corner tool the front on here, and I'm going to use this one as my front panel, and then on the back of this one, I'm just going to do probably a border or something. I haven't decided yet, so we'll go ahead and tape this up just to keep it from stretching while we're whooping on it. All right, so I went ahead and did the whole thing. Here's the reason I did. Start thinking about it, since we're not lining it, when we go to antique this, I don't want antique being on the inside of this bag because you're gonna see it. So I'm gonna go ahead and tape up both of them. It's gonna, one, it's gonna keep it from stretching, but also two, it's going to protect the inside of this bag so that it doesn't get any antique stains when we go to antiquing. If you're real careful, you don't have to worry about that, but for me, I'm gonna get antique back there somehow, so we're gonna go ahead and just do that. So this one's ready to be tooled. I'll get this one taped up here, and then we'll be back over at the tooling bench. All right, so we've got our piece prepped for tooling. I'm gonna begin to design this panel here, and I'm gonna do some type of floral set, just kind of coming down here. Went ahead and put our brand in there, the key brand. We went ahead and got that in there. So we're gonna go ahead and get all the tooling designed here, and I'll show just a little bit of the design work and a little bit of the tool work, and then we'll come back whenever we're ready to do our finish work. Okay, so we've gotten all our tooling done. I went ahead and did all my finish work as well. I did a real heavy oil and an antiquing on this piece. I wanted to address a little situation here. If you'll notice in this piece, we've got a bunch of these darkened marks right here. It's a couple things. One, some of this, sometimes on projects, you will have marks that will show up. They're faint scars that you really can't see in the hide until you go to oil it. I don't really have a good scenario or a fix for that. All I know is that it's happened to me as well, especially on like a slick out saddle. You'll get these little marks that show up, and so that's what I'm pretty sure some of these are. These are like real faint scars, old scars that the cow had that they're not going to show up whenever the hide is, or whenever the leather's fresh and it hadn't been oiled at all. But I also know that when I tooled this, I was wearing a pearl snap shirt, a button-down shirt, and I suspect that some of this is that, and that is something that you probably need to keep an eye on. Some leathers will take marks a little bit easier that way, or with that, than other times. And this particular piece, I noticed it tooling it, the leather had a little bit different temper to it and is very susceptible to that. And I suspect some of this was that right there, just the buttons on my shirt. So if you go back to our podcast with Chuck Storms, he talks about how he only wears a t-shirt in the shop, and that's to keep that kind of thing from happening. No watch on, nothing like that. And you do have to be careful with that when you're working on projects. Unfortunately, you know, like I said, we've got some marks. I suspect some of these, that's exactly what that is, but there are also some of these scarrings that didn't show up until we really got to putting some oil in here. So that's just kind of part of, you know, dealing with veg tan. Sometimes you'll get that. It's not very common, but sometimes you will, so just be mindful of that. And this is not going to affect our project as we're doing it here together, because I'm making this for my wife and my daughter so they can use for their little 4-H stuff. And we're also going to put these straps right here, and then these handles will be inside there. So it'll kind of cover some of that up, and some of that also too. You can look at some of these, like the scarring deal. This here, that's I think from my shirt. But the scars and stuff, it's kind of a natural part of dealing with a natural product. But we've got the finish done on that. I did just a black brand on here, a heavy oil, and then an antique on here. And so the back, I just did a little border. Those pieces are done. I've got the handles. I've got our straps. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back here and we're going to sand all these pieces. We're going to edge these pieces. I'm going to edge this piece here on the top. I'm going to edge just the top part from where our gusset's going to go, and go ahead and slick that, and then we'll edge these, make sure they're true, and we'll get these lined and get those ready to sew up. Same thing on these. We're going to shape these up some. These, when you're cutting these out, you saw me cut these out by hand, you could definitely just strip out a piece of leather that width and then go ahead and use an end punch there if you have the proper size end punch. You could even do a pointed one if you didn't want it rounded. I just cut them out by hand because that's where I was, and I've got a nice sanding machine, so we'll sand those up and shape them up. After the sanding, I'm going to go ahead and start oiling these to get these to match this color, because I don't want to be adding oil to them once they're on the bag. So we'll go ahead and do that. Then we'll come back, like I said, and get our gusset ready to go, where we can you know, get that kind of fitted up so we know how long that's going to be. Okay, so we got all the stuff sanded. I'm going to go ahead and oil all these before I edge them, just so that edge doesn't soak up too much oil, kind of weird. And so we're going to go ahead and oil all these, but I want to show you real quick on these handles. You know, the easier you cut them out, the less sanding you've got to do, so try to cut them precise. But I like to get in here and clean up these corners and then kind of this inside. I was able to sand around the outside on our machine, but I'm not able to get on the inside. So I'm going to have to do that with two of our sanding tools. And we have a video on different types of sanding tools that I keep around my shop. One being, which is probably the most handy, is this, just a round dowel rod. You can do these in different sizes, different diameters, but then I just have a piece of sandpaper wrapped around it. Now you can definitely, this old piece here, we actually glued a piece of sandpaper on there. It's long since been wore out, but you could definitely do that. Here, now I just hold it on there. But that allows you to get into these curves there and sand those areas out and get a nice clean area in there so that it looks nice and smooth. Now we'll do some touch-up sanding once we line these and when we put the heel blocks in there. but I just want to get a good start on it so that I know that it's straight and everything, so that when I make my stitch lines with our groover, that I've got a nice true edge to go around. So that's why I'm doing it now versus after it's lined. But I'm just going to go in there and clean this up. Once I get all both the inside curves on one, I'll come in here and straighten up the straight lines with this sanding block here. And this is just a piece of 2x2, I believe. Again, you can make these any size you want, but it's just got sandpaper nailed onto it. Something like that is a good handy deal just to get all your edges nice and sanded and even. So when you run that stitch line, it's straight. Okay, so we've got our other pieces over there oiling, and so if you notice on the pattern, if you get the pattern, I have a mark there and there where the gusset is going to stop. And so we're going to, where that mark is, that's where the gusset will come around and stop right there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and edge and slick this top part just right past those marks. So we can go ahead and do that now. We'll edge the rest of it and slick it once we get the gusset in there. And so we're just going to edge and slick these, and then we'll be ready to, once the handles are made and completed, we're ready to install these. So we'll be done with these until then, after we do this edge slicking. Okay, so we've got our handles over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and glue these down to, I've just got a piece of 3/4 ounce veg tan. You just want something, like I said, to stiffen these handles up a little bit. So we're going to laminate those to a piece of 3/4. And you can certainly use different weights for this. This is just kind of what I used on there and what worked best for me. And so we'll just glue these down, and then we'll run our stitch lines, and we'll sew these up on the machine. Alright, so our glue is set up, so we'll go ahead and just glue these down. Glue both of these down here. Try to keep them straight, don't pull the ends in there. You kind of want to keep them nice and square. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut our heel blocks here in just a minute. It's a little block that's going to go right here, you'll see that. What we want to do is use our pattern to mark where that's going to go, because we're going to sew these first, and then we'll stop, or then we'll put the heel blocks on there and sew those on, and then we'll sand and edge all these together. So we're going to sew basically from right past that mark all the way around, and then from right past that mark all the way around. Then we'll put our heel blocks on there, glue them on, and then we'll sew around the little heel blocks. And so we don't want to sew all the way around the bottom, because that'll just cause issues when you're trying to sew. You get too many holes in there, needle holes, and so we'll just stop our stitching and do it that way. And so before we sew these up or put our groove lines in there to sew it, I'm going to go ahead and cut out these heel blocks so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. Now I've got a piece here of close to 12 ounce leather. Well, it's not close, it's over 12 ounce, but you can probably get by with 9/10 would probably work. It's not that critical. You just want a nice firm piece, because that's what's going to keep the handle in place when you're carrying the bag. So we want something that's a good stop, and I'll show you what that looks like when we put them on, and kind of how everything comes together. You'll understand how it goes. But you're going to want these pretty firm, and preferably a little heavier than 9/10. Just in my mind I'm thinking that, but like I said, 9/10 would probably be plenty to keep them from going up underneath that little tab. And so we're just going to draw some lines here, and we'll cut these little heel blocks out right quick. Okay, so we've got those cut out, and so we've got our marks. And so basically you're going to cut these out. Don't have to worry about sanding them or anything too much, as long as they're pretty close to this bottom piece of your handle. You just want to put that on there, and we will glue that right there in place, and we'll sew around it to sew it in place. Okay, so that's what that's for. And we'll oil those as well while we're sewing these up. I'll get those oiling so they match, and then we'll glue them in place after we sew this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and groove this, and I'm going to use my bigger groover, I think. And so I'm just going to come just a little bit past our mark that we made. Now I always say that you don't have to groove it if you don't want to groove it when you're sewing. I would say on these handles, just for professionalism and making them look pretty, I would highly suggest grooving these, because they make a really nice handle when we're done. They're not complicated, but they look very nice. Okay, so we'll carry those over to the machine and we'll get those sewn. Alright, so we've got these sewn, and so now we'll just trim off all this 3/4, and then we'll glue our tabs on. I'm going to go ahead and glue these on now, sew them on, and then I'll oil them after. Since they're not actually on the bag, we're not going to be worried about that, so I'll just go ahead and we'll sew them on right now, just for the sake of the video. But you can definitely dye them if you're going to dye them, or do whatever you're going to do before you end up putting them on. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these, line it up really good there at the bottom. Like I said, get it as close as you can, and that way we don't have quite as much sanding to do. And then I'm going to mark where it's going to go. And you can, they're all the same size, or should be if you cut them out right. So we're just going to put a mark. It's just going to tell us where our glue is going to go on these. Now I went ahead and stepped back there to my sander. You can also use your sanding block, but whatever. But be sure that this is straight. You want this as square as possible, because it's going to bump up against these straps that we sew onto the front of the bag. So you want to be sure it's straight. You don't want it at an angle. So just keep that in mind. Be sure that those are straight. They were a little off, so I went ahead and cleaned them up. But like I said, so what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and just groove around here. And it can be a little tedious, but... And be sure and leave yourself enough stitch relief. Don't get your groove real close to this edge, especially if you're sewing on a machine, because you're going to be sewing through a couple layers of pretty heavy leather. You want to be sure that you got plenty of meat on the outside of that stitch line. So don't be scared to run that stitch line in a little bit further than normal, than what you're used to, because you want to be sure that needle and that stitch is going to catch it all, and it's not going to pop out or come out one side or break your needle. If you're hand sewing, it's a little easier to kind of handle that, but even there, I would leave yourself a little bit deeper stitch relief. Now you'll notice that we're not going to edge up here. Even though it's going to be glued and sewn down, why don't we go ahead and edge that? We're not going to edge it with a regular edger, because I don't want this rounded. I want it flush, because again, it's going to hit this strap, and I need it like a heel on the inside of a boot. That's why I call them heel block, is because that is going to hit right there, and it's going to stay there, and it's going to be a nice, good, firm attachment there when the handle's slid up at full height. And so we don't really want to do that. Now, if you want to take a really small edger, depending on the thickness of the leather you're using, I'm using 13-15, this is probably closer to 13, and just very lightly knock off that little bit of that top, and then we'll slick that, but don't edge the bottom of it, and don't edge it very much. We want a nice squared off look right there, okay? If you do edge it, it's probably not a killer, but I just find that if you edge something like that that you're wanting to be stable up against something else, you can create too much of a roll right there and it'll end up sliding up underneath there. So we want that nice and flat. And then we'll go ahead just real quick and just put a little bit of soap on here and just give it a little slick. We're not going to slick it like, you know, you can slick it however you want. If you want to get a real nice shine, I'm going to let these dry just a minute, and then I'm going to put some dye on them so that they are dyed, just to kind of finish that out. But try to keep that nice and flat right there. Okay, so I let I added some dye onto there, just this top part of these. While we let that dry for just a minute, we're going to go ahead now and edge all of our little handle straps. We're going to go ahead and edge and slick all of these, and that way they can be drying, and then we can get some dye on those and get them marked, and then we can get ready to sew those onto the bag when we install the handles, because we will sew these onto the bag with the handles in them. It's the only way to really get them on there. So we're going to do that all at one time. We'll get these edged right quick. Okay, so we've got our little straps. I got them edged, slicked, and dyed. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to take our pattern and we're just going to mark. I've got marks on the pattern on where you're going to stitch. And all we're going to stitch is a little U shape here. Not going to stitch across, we're just going to stitch a U shape. And that right there will, the handle obviously will go in between the two stitches. We'll stitch each end down to the bag. And so we'll just put a little dot and a little dot, and that'll tell us where we need to begin our stitches. And then once we get all these marked, then we'll come in again and we'll just run our groove around there for where we're going to sew it. Then we'll get all these ready to go, prepped up, and then we'll go ahead and sew on our heel blocks. Okay, so our straps are ready. So now we'll go ahead and glue these in place, and just you want to be sure that they're glued down good. You know, it's not like you got to use 3 coats or anything, but you just want to be sure they're held in place nicely, so when you sew these, they don't squish around on you. So we're just going to put glue on them and line them up, and then we'll sew them up on the machine. If you want, you can take and scratch up where that heel block is going to go, and that will help that glue to stick, and that way they'll stay in place a little better. Sometimes if you get the handles completely finished with 10 coat and everything, it can be hard for them to actually stick in place. Okay, so our glue has dried just a little bit, so now we'll go ahead and glue these down. Like I said, just be sure you got them where they're completely on the strap there. We can trim, or we will trim and sand, make these all look like one layer. So as you can see there, that's kind of how you've got that big ledge there. So this strap, when that handle is pulled up, it'll bump that strap right there. That's going to hold it in place. Okay, that's going to hold the handle. That's your fastener for the handle, and then it's free to slide up and down. And so now we'll take these to the machine and we'll get them sewn up right quick. Okay, so we've got these sewn on, and so now I'm just going to use this sander right here, and I'm going to just sand all of this around and make it look nice and even, get it all sanded. We've already pretty well sanded that, but I'm going to go ahead and touch up around the outside where we trim that 3/4. Okay, so these have all been, both of these have been sanded really well, and you can see how we've got nice smooth there around that end there, so that's what we want. Now we're going to edge these. I'm going to edge the top piece of this with a heavier edger. I'm going to go with a number 4. Actually, I'm going to use a number 5, I think. And I'm going to go ahead on around the bottom, and I'm going to edge that top piece pretty aggressively. I want to take off quite a bit because I want it to look nice and clean. Be careful, you might have to go back the opposite way so you don't do what I did there. But we're going to edge both of those heel blocks with a heavier edger. Just use a little bigger one. You can use whatever size you've got. This one here needs to be sharpened just a little bit. I've been working on some unsavory repair projects and probably dulled it up. So now I'm going to step down to my number 4 edger. I'm actually going to use, yeah, I'll try number 4. Let me see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So since we've got a pretty good stitch relief in there, we can use a little bigger edger. We have a video talking about how to choose your edger and that kind of thing, and I'll talk about that in there, about leaving yourself enough room to take off the right amount of material so that you're actually edging it and you're not just knocking the little corner off. You actually want to round the thickness of your material. Go back and watch that video and it'll explain what I'm talking about. We're going to edge that pretty good, and then we're going to come on the other side and get that. Now on the ends of them, I'm just going to use the same edger all the way around the back. I just want to use a heavier edger for this one since that heel block is pretty heavy, and so I want to be sure and get that rounded. And so here we'll edge the back side here. Okay, and so the reason we want to be sure and leave enough stitch relief and have a little heavier edging on this is mainly too because somebody's going to hold this, right? This is going to be, whoever carries this bag is going to hold these handles a lot, so we want them comfortable in the hand. We don't want any sharp corners on our edge, so that edge is nice and rounded. Now we'll get the other one edged up, and then we'll get these slicked and let them dry a little bit. We'll add some dye, and we'll be ready to attach them to the front and back of the bag. Alright, so we're ready to install our handles onto the front and back panel. You're going to want to do this before we put our gusset in, obviously, that way we can get these sewn in. I've got kind of a little trick, makes it a little easier. Instead of marking the pattern, we'll have these as far as where they go on the front and back panel. It'll have it marked, but you can mark it if you want, but I would suggest not marking it. And what we're going to do is, basically, if you come from the outer edge on this size of a deal, about 5.5 inches, and put us a little mark, and then come from this side 5.5 inches and put a mark. That's going to tell you where this handle is going to sit. That will center the handle up left to right on the front panel and the back panel as well. So 5.5 inches from the end, put a mark. Then what we want to do is on the outside of those marks here on the top, put a little mark at 5/8, and then a mark here at 5/8. And I'm just going to eyeball this. You can definitely lay this out and mark it if you'd rather. So what that's going to do is that's going to tell you how far from the edge this strap needs to be. I have it laid out to where that strap needs to be about 5/8 of an inch from the top. And so I'm just going to look at that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I can see that 5/8 mark. So we'll put one on this side of the, put it on the inside, I'm sorry. put it on the inside of where those 5.5 inch marks are. That way whenever the handle's in there, you can see that mark. And I'm just going to eyeball it. Like I said, if you want to mark it out, you sure can. But what I've done now, also, if you want to sew, if you want to have a stitch line on this top, say you line this bag, and you prefer to sew this top or even just dummy stitch it, go ahead and do that before you put these on, obviously, because they're going to be sewn in, they're going to be in your way. So you can go ahead and sew a line over the top, just stop where your gusset is going to stop. You maybe go a stitch or two past that, and then sew around to the other side, and then that'll catch that, and then when we sew the gusset in, it'll all look the same. I did that on the first bag. On this bag, I'm not going to sew along the top here. I'm just going to leave it unsewn. It's not lined, so I just think it looks a little cleaner. So we're just going to try that and see how that works, how that looks. Now what I've done is I've taken the little handle straps, and we're going to try this. I used double-sided tape. I tried to glue it the first time that I did one of these bags, and it didn't really glue really well because we got finish on there and stuff like that. So we're going to try this double-sided tape, and I think it's going to work. The trick is you've got to put these on while the handle's in there. You can't slide the handle on there after they're sewn on. So we're going to go ahead and just do it this way. What we want to do is center it up from where our groove marks are, and that way we know the handle's in the middle where we're going to sew. And then I'm going to use that 5/8 mark. I've got the handle held down. The inside of the handle is held at 5.5. So that's centering the handle. Now I'm going to put this on, center it on the handle, and then make sure that I'm at the 5/8 mark up here. And then it looks, you know, square with the top. And you could probably shape these a little bit and make it hold a little bit better. But that's holding pretty good with that double-sided tape. And so now we'll glue this other one, or set this other one on here. And it should be already on the 5.5 inch mark on the inside. I'll center it up, line up with my 5/8 mark, make sure I'm square at the top. And then we'll just push that in place. Give it a little tap with a hammer so we get good adhesion. And so now that is ready to sew. Now just be careful with it as you're sewing. Like I said, we're just going to sew around here and then sew around there. That's going to mount them in place. They may try to pop up. Just try to hold them in place. It's really not that difficult to just hold them in place if you want to do that, but I prefer to use some type of adhesive just to keep them so they don't move around. So I'll get this other one set up like this, and then we'll go to the sewing machine and sew all 4 straps on at one time. Okay, so we got our handles sewn in. As you can see, those little heel blocks, they just stop that handle from coming out. It would take a lot for you to pry this up enough to be able to pull this handle completely out. And this bag's not going to be very big, so it's not going to hold a ton of weight. But I think that's a pretty secure handle. It's just really nice. And then if you go to store it, you just push it down, and it takes up less room, and your handles don't get all marred up and bent up. I just think it's a nice, clean way to do a handle. So now these are done, and we are ready to install our gusset. So let me grab that, and we will get prepared to fit our gusset to this and get this bag sewn up. All right, so I've got our gusset material. I've already gone through and used the bell skiver to skive the edge of this down. You don't necessarily have to do that if you've got a really nice soft piece of chap leather and you don't have a bell skiver. You can skip that part. But if it's pretty nice, bag leather or something, and you can take your skiving knife and skive a little bit of that off, it'll just make making these corners a little bit easier. And since we've gotten the bell skiver in the shop, I'm using it more and more and finding that helps a whole bunch just to make a nice clean corner. And also this will glue a lot better because we've taken off the flesh side some, and it's going to take glue a lot better. So we've got that ready to go. And remember, in the pattern pack, I give you you can cut this 3 inches wide all the way up to 4 or 5 inches wide, depending on what kind of bag you want. But then as far as the length, I think I have on there 34 to 36 inches long. That should be plenty to go from our marks on each side all the way around. But just cut it a little long, and that way you're going to do exactly what we're going to do here, which is we're going to fit it to this bag in case there's a little stretch. Material stretches differently, just like we've talked about in other videos that we've done. We always want to fit those gussets to the project, not trust a pattern, and just to trust that it's going to work, especially if you're tooling something. You're going to be surprised on how much stretch you're going to get out of a piece of leather when you're tooling that. And so now we'll go ahead, and these two I've already checked them, and they're pretty well the exact same size still. We put that tape on there, and that really helped out to keep it from stretching. So now we'll take our groover, and we're going to start at our mark up here, and we're just going to groove a line all the way around our edge where we're going to sew. Okay, so now we'll just take some contact cement, and I'm just going to glue this gusset up on one side for right now. Try not to get your glue too far inside here. You just want along the edge, just enough to hold it in place while we sew that gusset. You don't want to see that glue inside this bag, if at all possible. So you could probably use just tape if you wanted to try double-sided tape, depending on your leather that you pick out for the gusset. This leather here is pretty firm. It's not super firm, but it's got some temper to it, and I just don't feel like the tape's going to hold it very well, and so I'm going to use glue. Okay, we'll set that off to the side, and we'll grab a panel. Either panel will work. Find your mark that you have on the front and put a mark on the inside so that you can see where you're gluing to. And then we'll glue from that mark to this mark. Now we'll let that glue dry, and then we'll fit this gusset and cut it to length. Okay, so our glue is dry. Got it nice and tacky, ready to glue in. Before we glue this gusset in to fit it, I'm going to go ahead and use a square, and I'm going to square up one end of your gusset. We want to do that so that it's the same when we put the other panel on there. So we'll come in here and just square this up. And so we'll use this end. This other end is just kind of wild because we're going to cut some of it off. So we'll start here, and we're just going to begin to just glue that in. Now remember, just like on all our other gussets, don't want to leave too much of an overhang, but you want to be sure that you're on the material so that you don't miss it when you're sewing it. And you can see as I come around here how much nicer that corner makes with that leather skived down just a little bit right there. It's also going to make it a lot nicer when you go to sew it. And just walk that around. I'm not really pulling the gusset a bunch. I'm not trying to stretch it, just trying to get it laid in place. And now we're back over here on this other side. So now I can see my mark, and I'm going to put a mark where that needs to go. So now I can pull the gusset off. And I'm already noticing that this leather is not sticking very well. So we might have to try some tape. That's something that you sometimes don't know until you start messing with the particular leather that you chose. Some of the old tans and bag leathers just honestly don't glue very well. So we'll cut that off. So you can see how we're not wasting a whole bunch, but now this gusset is fit for this project. And so I just figured out why that it didn't glue very well, and it didn't because I was gluing down the edge of the gusset that I had not glued. Honest mistake, we were just trying to size it, but this side, it's tacky enough that it held it perfectly in place for us to cut it to length. So, but just be mindful of that. I've done that more than once. But just now that gusset will glue in just right now. Now it's on there good, okay? I was wondering, because I didn't feel like that was very oily, but sometimes your leathers will be kind of have a lot of oil in them, and that glue will not stick, and it'll do just like what it was trying to do on me. It just felt like it was sliding around here in that corner, and that's why it was doing that, is because one side didn't have any glue on it. And because I was goofed and was using the wrong side, but it held it just enough. But you want to be sure that you've got good contact, especially in these corners. And if you've got an oil tan that's super oily, you might have to use clips, like binder clips, something like that, to hold those in place and pull them off as you sew, because you don't want that gusset moving, especially in these corners. But now this is gluing up very nicely when I use the right side of the gusset that I actually applied glue to. And so, again, I'm not really pulling it or stretching it. But yeah, this is gluing much better. And I'm not overhanging a ton. We're just about where we need to be. If you need to push it to get on your mark, you can certainly do that. And you can kind of work that out so that your tops are the same distance from the top here. So if it comes out a little bit, you know, you can fudge it if it's a little bit. That's why I say don't pull your gusset as you come around. Just lay it down, because we've already fit this, so we want it to end right. And I might have pulled it a little too much in a corner or something, and I gained maybe a 1/8 inch maybe. And so we just push that back to where it's on the mark, the end's on the mark, and I just push the slack out. And so there's no wrinkles. It still looks good. So that's fine. If you get a 1/2 inch, you're probably going to have to reset that gusset or move your marks up a little bit to compensate. Or the easier thing would be just to cut your gusset off a 1/2 inch to make it fit right. And as you can see, I don't have a lot of overhang, but I have just, I'm sure to be along the edge, so that as we sew this, we're catching that gusset, because you're not going to be able to see that when you're sewing. So you want to be sure that you're catching that. So now this is ready, so we'll sew this front on the machine, and then we will glue it to the back panel, and this bag will be pretty close to being done. Okay, so as you can see, we got right there. You can kind of see on this one and this one how even though that glue was stuck really good, it did kind of try to squeeze it to the inside just a hair. So in your corners, it might help sometimes to leave maybe just a hair bit of feather so that you can see that. But it caught it plenty good. We can sand that up, edge it up. It's going to look fine. It's not bad at all, but it can scare you as you come around that corner because you're sewing here and you can't see your gusset under there. So sometimes I'll leave a little bit more feather just so, as long like that right there, as long as I can see that as I'm going around the corner, I know I'm catching the gusset. Because you may have already done that at some point, sewing up a bag of some sort. You get done sewing it and your gusset has shifted to the inside and you missed it completely in the corner with the stitches. And that's a very frustrating thing to try to fix. So just be mindful of that. So now we'll glue this up and then glue up our other panel. We'll put those together, make sure they're straight, and sew that up, and the bag will be put together. Okay, so our glue has gotten tacky, and so we're ready to glue the back panel on now. And this is going to be just like we do on any kind of bag that we build, or rope bag. You want the two panels to be square to each other. So if we go off our marks, it should end up right. But once you glue it on, we're going to stand the bag up and make sure that both panels are on the table. Remember, we can use that as our guide as far as if both of these bags are on the table, then we know it's square. If you got one that's kicked up and the other one's on the table, you know you need to reset that gusset and adjust its placement to the other one. So we'll go ahead and glue this on. I'm going off my marks of where the gusset should stop, not pulling the gusset material much, if any. Start on this end, get this one set on my mark. Okay, so we got lucky on this one right off the bat. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So just check it before you go to sewing it. But that bag sits flat on the table. Both the front and the back are both on the table flush. And so that means that they're straight with each other. That's just a good check, like I said, just to make sure the bag will stand and also doesn't look funny. If they look twisted, you may not notice it till you're done and you're sitting back looking at it going, that thing's twisted, and you've already sewn it in. So it can be a problem. So just check that, but just gonna make sure that I've got good adhesion there with my glue, especially in these corners. And now we'll sew this on the machine and we'll be just about done. Okay, we got the back sewn on, everything sewed up good, but I want to mention one thing right here to be mindful of. I kind of got into a little bobble here in my corner, and it was just kind of, when you're coming down to this corner, one thing you want to be sure that you do is you don't necessarily have to glue that material further into the bag, but before you sew it, you need to push that corner kind of in if you can and tickle it down, and that way that cylinder arm, the head of the cylinder arm there, can come around there and fit, because if it doesn't and your material is stuck out too far close to the edge and that machine can't push that out of the way, it will push your work further out of the working platform or working area of the stitcher. And so basically what it did is I sewed outside of my stitch groove about 3 or 4 stitches, so I had to back it out, pull those stitches and come back in. But it's a real simple fix. I just didn't pay attention. But when you do your corners, once you glue them in, just kind of push that in there. It's not so much of a problem before when you only have one panel you're sewing on, but when you go to put the final one on your gusset, sometimes that's something you've got to kind of just contend with. But it worked out good, and we can rub out those stitch holes. They're real close to that, so it's not a big deal. This other side sewed up just good, just fine. So just keep that in mind when you're getting around a corner. Just be sure you've got enough room for that cylinder arm underneath there to fit through there. But we've got the back panel on. This bag is essentially finished. All we're going to do now is sand our edges and edge them, slick them, and dye them, and this bag will be completely finished. And we'll get that done right quick, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, so that's making our simple briefcase. I had a lot of fun making this bag. I've actually made 2 of them. I made one just to get the patterns all lined out, and then I decided for the one in the video I was going to go ahead and make for my daughter, like I said earlier, and that way she's got one and we can use it, you know, if she's not using it or something like that. It's just a handy bag. You can put you can put your laptop in here, iPad, a few little files, some paperwork you need for just like a certain meeting or a certain event. You can throw that stuff in there and kind of go on. You can add some stuff to this bag if you wanted to kind of adapt it and you wanted to do some more like do some D-rings here with a different style of handle. That would be something fairly easy to change. You could also add some D's on the side here if you preferred to have a shoulder strap with this case. But all in all, I think this bag works really well. If you wanted to make it all out of skirting leather, you certainly could. It's just going to make the bag a little heavier, and I opted for this bag to be fairly light and fairly easy to build, so it doesn't take a whole lot of time. So if you're looking for that type of bag that you can make up for your customers, make 4 or 5 of these, take them to a show, and kind of go from there, this is a good option. It doesn't take near the leather that the buckhorn bag did, or a lot of other briefcases, so that's a good thing as well, and it leaves a lot of room for artwork. Like I said, we are offering a pattern pack for this. Links are down in the description for that. We're offering it in a printed as well as a digital version. Remember that the digital version on this bag is a large format print, so if you get the digital version, you will need to take that somewhere and have it printed. You won't be able to print it out on your own printer, but as far as the printed version, if you're in the US, just purchase that one and we'll ship that one right out to you. And it's got 6 different floral tooling patterns and all of your cut patterns for all of your pieces and things like that. So I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see y'all in the next project video.